Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. At 52, Evelyne thought her story was already written, a quiet widow tending her herbs, forgotten by love and time. But when an ancient prophecy calls her to the village's sacred mating ceremony, everything changes. She collapses in the circle of fire and awakens in the stone chambers of Alaric, an alpha vampire who has lived alone for centuries. When their eyes meet, something impossible happens. He sees the woman he lost long ago. She feels a power she never knew existed. Now she must choose between her safe, quiet life and a love that could change everything. But can a mortal woman truly find happiness with an immortal heart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of Millbrook like a shroud, weaving between the timber-framed houses that had stood for generations. Evelyne Ashford pulled her woolen shawl tighter as she stepped from her cottage, the familiar weight of her herb basket settling into the crook of her arm. At 52, she moved with the measured grace of a woman who had learned to find purpose in quiet routines. Her cottage sat at the village's edge, where wild flowers grew untamed along the ancient stone wall that separated civilization from the dense forest beyond. The garden she tended was her sanctuary, rows of chamomile, lavender, and heartsease, creating a tapestry of healing herbs that had sustained the village through countless ailments. The villagers came to her for remedies, but they rarely stayed for conversation. Widows, she had learned, became invisible in a world that celebrated new beginnings. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford." Young Margaret Thorne hurried past, her arms laden with freshly baked bread for the morning market, her cheeks flushed pink with the exertion, and her eyes sparkled with the anticipation that only came to those preparing for their first mating ceremony. "Good morning, dear." Evelyne's voice carried the warmth she felt, watching the younger generation embrace traditions that had once filled her own heart with hope. Margaret would stand in the sacred circle tonight, along with a dozen other young souls seeking their destined partners. The ceremony happened only once each generation, a mystical tradition that bound hearts under the watchful eyes of the ancient stones. Evelyne continued her morning rounds, collecting wild nettle from the forest's edge and checking her drying racks, where winter stores of medicinal herbs hung in fragrant bundles. The rhythm of her work had become a meditation over the years since Thomas passed. Her husband had been gone 5 years now, taken by a fever that even her most potent remedies couldn't cure. They had been blessed with love, but never with children, leaving her to face the autumn of her life alone. The village itself seemed to pulse with energy today. Families bustled about, preparing for the evening ceremony with the same careful attention they gave to harvest festivals or holy feast days. The mating ceremony was different, though older, more mysterious. It drew its power from sources that predated the village church, reaching back to times when the boundary between the mortal world and something far more ancient was gossamer thin. Elder Godfrey emerged from the village hall as Evelyne passed, his weathered face grave as always. He carried the weight of tradition on his shoulders, keeper of the old ways and guardian of secrets that most villagers had forgotten. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's despite his 70 years, found hers across the square. "Mrs. Ashford." His voice carried an odd formality that made her pause. "I trust you received my message." Evelyne nodded, though the memory of his unexpected visit still unsettled her. 3 days ago he had appeared, at her door with news that defied understanding. The ancient prophecies, he explained, called for her presence at tonight's ceremony, not as an observer but as a participant. "I still don't understand why." 19, she admitted, adjusting her basket. "The ceremony is for the young, for those seeking their first bonds. I'm well past such things." Elder Godfrey's expression remained unreadable. The old texts speak of a time when the chosen one would be marked by wisdom rather than youth. The signs are clear. Mrs. Ashford. The stars align as they haven't in 3 centuries, and your name appears in prophecies older than our village itself. She had read the passages he'd shown her, written in a script that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at it. The words spoke of a bridge between worlds, a woman whose heart had known loss, but whose spirit remained strong enough to bind what had been torn asunder. It was mystical nonsense, surely, yet something deep within her had stirred when she touched the ancient parchment. "And if I refuse?" she had asked. "Then we must trust that the ancient powers will guide us to understanding," he had replied. But his eyes suggested that refusal was not truly an option. Now, standing in the morning light, with the weight of expectation settling around her like a cloak, Evelyne felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in years, purpose beyond the daily rituals of survival. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. She spent the afternoon in her garden, gathering the last of the season's roses for drying. The work usually calmed her mind, but today her thoughts wandered to memories of her own youth, when she had stood in similar ceremonies, hoping for love to find her. Thomas had come to her not through mystical ritual, but through the simple sweetness of shared conversations over her herb counter. Their love had been gentle, comfortable, built on mutual respect and quiet affection rather than passion's fire. What could the prophecies possibly want with her now? She was no maiden dreaming of romance, no young woman whose life stretched ahead like an unwritten book. Her story was nearly complete, its pages filled with small kindnesses, daily struggles, and the bittersweet acceptance that came with learning to live alone. As evening approached, the village transformed. Torches flickered to life along the ancient pathways that led to the ceremonial grounds beyond the forest's edge. The air filled with the scent of burning sage and something else, something older and wilder that seemed to call to her blood. Evelyne dressed carefully in her finest gown, a deep blue wool that Thomas had given her years ago for their wedding anniversary. The fabric still held its rich color, and wearing it made her feel connected to the woman she had been when love was new and the future held infinite possibilities. Around her neck, she wore the silver pendant that had belonged to her grandmother, then her mother, and now to her. The oval locket contained a pressed violet from her wedding bouquet, but lately she had noticed it felt warm against her skin at odd moments, as if responding to some unseen energy. The other villagers gathered in the square as twilight deepened. Families surrounded their young participants with blessings and nervous laughter. Evelyne stood apart, feeling the weight of curious glances and whispered conversations. Mrs. Blackwood, the baker's widow, approached with poorly concealed concern. "Are you certain about this, dear? It seems rather unusual for someone of our age to what?" Evelyne asked gently. "To hope? To remain open to possibilities?" Mrs. Blackwood flushed. "I meant no offense. It's just that we've grown comfortable in our routines. Change can be dangerous at our time of life." Perhaps that was precisely the problem, Evelyne thought, as the procession began moving toward the forest. Perhaps she had grown too, comfortable with emptiness, too accepting of a life that asked nothing of her heart. The pendant grew warmer against her throat as they walked, and she found herself falling into step with the ancient rhythm of the ceremony. The sacred grove lay deep within the forest, where enormous standing stones formed a perfect circle around a clearing carpeted with moss and wildflowers. Torches blazed at each stone's base, casting dancing shadows that made the carved symbols seem to writhe and move. The air hummed with energy that raised the fine hairs on Evelyne's arms. Elder Godfrey took his place at the circle's head, holding aloft the Book of Village Prophecies. The ancient tome's leather binding was dark with age, its pages yellowed and fragile. When he opened it, the writing seemed to glow in the firelight, revealing passages that told of destinies written in stars and blood. "Tonight, we gather as our ancestors have for generations beyond counting." His voice rang out across the four. Clearing, we call upon the ancient powers to guide hearts to their true companions, to weave the threads of fate into bonds that will strengthen our community and honor the old ways. One by one, the young participants stepped into the circle. Margaret Thorne found her place beside William Fletcher, their hands joining as naturally as streams flowing together. Others followed, some with obvious pairings that surprised no one, others creating connections that sparked murmurs of delight from watching families. And then Elder Godfrey's eyes found Evelyne's across the circle. The prophecies speak of one whose heart has known the depths of loss and emerged with wisdom intact. One whose spirit bridges the gap between what was and what might yet be. Evelyne Ashford, daughter of this village, keeper of healing arts, widow and wise woman, stepped forward. Her legs moved without conscious decision, carrying her into the circle's center. The pendant at her throat grew warm, then hot, its silver surface beginning to emit a soft, pearl-like glow that made several villagers gasp. She looked down in wonder. The locket had never done anything like this before. "The ancient powers recognize you," Elder Godfrey intoned, his voice filled with reverence and something that might have been fear. "What was foretold now comes to pass." The stones around the circle began to resonate with a low, harmonic hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. The flames of the torches stretched higher, their light taking on an otherworldly blue-white intensity. Evelyne felt the energy building around her like a storm about to break, and her pendant grew so warm it was nearly burning against her skin. "I don't understand," she whispered, but her words were lost in the rising sound of the stones. The world began to spin, colors bleeding together like watercolors in rain. The faces of the villagers blurred and faded, their concerned voices growing distant as if heard through deep water. The pendant's light flared brilliantly, and Evelyne felt her consciousness slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. Her last, coherent thought before darkness claimed her was a strange sense of anticipation, as if she were not falling but flying toward something that had been waiting for her far longer than she could possibly imagine. Consciousness returned slowly, like dawn breaking through heavy curtains. Evelyne's first awareness was of cold, not the harsh bite of winter air, but the deep, ancient chill of stone that had never known sunlight. Her second was the absence of familiar sounds. No village bells, no distant conversations, no gentle rustle of wind through her herb garden. She opened her eyes to darkness, broken only by the soft glow of candles, arranged along stone walls that stretched higher than the light could reach. The air carried scents she couldn't identify, something between incense and the deep earth smell of caves, touched with herbs that grew in no mortal garden. "You're safe." The voice came from the shadows, rich and carefully modulated, as if its owner was accustomed to startling people and had learned to speak gently. "Please, don't be afraid." Evelyne sat up slowly, her body surprisingly free of pain despite what she remembered of her collapse. She found herself on a bed draped in midnight blue velvet, softer than anything she had ever touched. Her clothes were unchanged, her pendant still warm against her throat, though its earlier glow had faded to the faintest shimmer. A figure stepped into the candlelight, and Evelyne's breath caught. He was tall and lean, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of strength held carefully in check. His hair was dark as a moonless night, falling to his shoulders in waves that caught the light like silk. But it was his eyes that held her pale blue like winter ice, ancient and infinitely sad, yet warming as they settled on her face. "My name is Alaric," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "You collapsed during your village ceremony. The sacred stones brought you here, to my realm, your realm." Evelyne's voice came out steadier than she felt. Years of tending to the sick had taught her to remain calm in strange circumstances, but this stretched beyond anything her experience could encompass. "I know it's difficult to understand. Your village exists in the mortal world, but when the old powers stir, barriers become permeable. The ceremony you participated in is older than your people. Remember, Older than most of mine, remember. Your people. She studied his face, noting the sharp beauty of his features, the way his skin seemed to hold an inner luminescence. What are you? He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing his words. I am what your kind call vampire, though the reality is far more complex than your legends suggest. I've lived in this place for 3 centuries, maintaining the balance between our worlds. Evelyne should have been terrified. Every instinct should have screamed at her to run, to pray, to faint again, and hope to wake from this impossible dream. Instead, she found herself studying him with the same careful attention she gave to unfamiliar herbs, noting details, seeking understanding. You don't seem surprised, Alaric observed, and she heard genuine curiosity in his voice. I've seen enough of life to know that the impossible happens more often than people admit, she replied, and something about this feels... She paused, searching for the right word. Familiar somehow. Something flickered in his ancient eyes. Recognition, hope, perhaps pain. He stepped closer, moving into the full candlelight, and Evelyne saw the careful control he maintained over every gesture, every expression. May I? He gestured toward a chair near her bed. She nodded, and he sat with fluid grace, his movements suggesting centuries of practice in making himself seem less threatening. Despite everything rational thought told, to her, Evelyne found she wasn't afraid. The warmth from her pendant seemed to pulse gently, as if reassuring her that this was where she belonged. Tell me about these sacred stones, she said. Elder Godfrey mentioned prophecies, but he was never clear about their meaning. Alaric's expression darkened slightly. Godfrey knows more than he shared with you, I suspect. The stones are anchors between worlds, placed by the first peoples who understood that mortal and immortal realms sometimes need bridges. They respond to those who carry the blood of the ancient lines. Ancient lines. Some mortal families carry traces of older magic in their bloodlines. It lies dormant for generations, then awakens in response to great need or powerful ritual. His eyes settled on her pendant, which had begun to glow softly again. That pendant, may I see it? Evelyne touched the silver locket reflexively. It was my grandmother's. Nothing special about it, just a family piece. With respect, I think you'll find it's far more than that. Alaric's voice held a note of reverence. The way it responds to your presence here, the energy it radiates, it's been waiting for you to awaken to your true nature. She lifted the chain over her head, studying the pendant in the candlelight. The silver seemed to pulse with inner light, and symbols she had never noticed before appeared to be etched faintly around its edges. I've worn this for 20 years, she murmured. It never did anything like this before. Because you weren't ready. Your heart needed to be opened by loss, tempered by solitude, before it could accept the truth of what you are. The words should have sounded like madness, but Evelyne felt their resonance deep in her bones. She thought of the years since Thomas's death, the slow acceptance of loneliness, the gradual understanding that her life had a different purpose than she had originally imagined. What am I, then? She asked quietly. A bridge, Alaric replied, his voice soft, with something that might have been wonder. Someone whose spirit can exist in both worlds, who can heal the rifts that have grown between mortal and immortal realms. He stood and moved to a tall window she hadn't noticed before. Beyond the glass, she glimpsed a landscape that defied earthly logic, silver trees under a twilight sky, where 2 moons hung like pearls, their light casting everything in ethereal beauty. This realm has been isolated for too long, he continued. My people have grown distant from yours, and both sides have suffered for the separation. The prophecies speak of one who could restore the old connections, heal ancient wounds. And you think I'm that person? Evelyne joined him at the window, marveling at the impossible vista. I'm a village widow who grows herbs. I have no grand powers, no special wisdom. Alaric turned to face her. and she saw centuries of loneliness reflected in his pale eyes. "You have something far rarer," the Yard, ability to see past surface differences to the heart of things. "I can sense it in you, the same quality that made you an exceptional healer in your village. How could you possibly know about my healing?" A slight smile touched his lips, transforming his austere features. "We've been watching your village for generations. Some of my people still remember when the two worlds existed in harmony, when healers like you worked with our knowledge to create remedies beyond anything either side could achieve alone." The pendant in her hand pulsed with warmth, and Evelyne felt a sudden rush of memories that weren't quite her own. Images of moonlit gardens where strange flowers bloomed, laboratories where mortal herbs were combined with immortal essences, healing arts that could cure any ailment or mend any wound. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, her hands moved to touch the glass of the window, and it responded to her presence with a gentle chime that seemed to welcome her. "Nothing is impossible here," Alaric said gently. "The question is whether you're willing to accept that your life is about to change in ways you never imagined." Evelyne looked out at the silver landscape, then back at this impossible man who spoke of ancient magic and bridging worlds. Every practical bone in her body insisted this was madness, but her heart recognized something in this place, in him, that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "The villagers," she said suddenly, "they'll be worried. They'll think something terrible has happened to me." Alaric's expression grew troubled. "Time moves differently here. Hours in this realm may be mere minutes in yours, or the reverse. But you're right to be concerned. Your disappearance will cause panic, and panic makes people do dangerous things. Then I should return immediately." "You could," he agreed, though something in his voice suggested reluctance. "The stones will take you back, if you truly wish it, but once you leave, you may never find your way here again. The paths between worlds don't open often." Evelyne felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Return to her quiet life of herbs and loneliness, or step forward into an impossible adventure that might change everything, not just for her, but for both their worlds. The pendant pulsed against her palm, warm and encouraging, and she realized that for the first time in years she felt truly alive. Evelyne chose to stay, though she couldn't fully explain why, even to herself. Perhaps it was the way Alaric's eyes held centuries of stories she wanted to hear, or the strange sense that her pendant had been pulling her toward this moment her entire life. Whatever the reason, when morning came to his impossible realm, if morning was the right word for the gradual brightening of the eternal twilight, she found herself walking beside him through gardens that defied every law of nature. She understood. The flowers here bloomed in colors that had no names, their petals seeming to capture and hold starlight. Some grew in spirals that reached toward the jewel moons, while others carpeted the ground in patterns too perfect to be natural. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle and her mind feel strangely clear. "Your realm is beautiful," she said, pausing beside a fountain, where crystal-clear water flowed upward in impossible curves before cascading into a pool that reflected not the sky above, but scenes from distant places. "It wasn't always like this." Alaric's voice carried a note of sadness. "When I first came here, it was barren, cold. The beauty, you see, grew over centuries of loneliness, shaped by memory and longing." "Longing for what?" He stopped walking, his ancient eyes growing distant. "For connection, for purpose, for someone who could see past the monster the stories made me into and recognize whatever humanity might remain." Evelyne studied his profile in the strange, beautiful light. Despite his pale skin and otherworldly grace, she saw no monster in him. There was sorrow, Yes, and a carefully controlled power that spoke of dangerous capabilities, but also kindness and a gentleness that seemed to cost him considerable effort to maintain. "What brought you here originally?" she asked. "Exile." The word came out flat, final. "My kind feared what I might become, so they banished me to this pocket between worlds. They thought isolation would either destroy me or teach me control." And which was it? A rueful smile touched his lips, both in their way. "I learned control through necessity, but the destruction that was more subtle. 3 centuries of solitude changes a man, even one who was never entirely human to begin with." They continued walking, passing through groves of silver trees whose leaves chimed softly in the breeze. Evelyne found herself telling him about her own life, her marriage to Thomas, their failure to have children, her gradual acceptance of widowhood. It surprised her how easily the words came, as if this impossible place freed her from the careful reserve she maintained in the village. "You loved him deeply," Alaric observed, and she heard no jealousy in the statement, only understanding. "I did. But it was a quiet love, comfortable and safe. We were friends who shared a bed and a home. Nothing like the passionate romances in stories." "And you regret that?" Evelyne considered the question as they approached a structure that seemed to be carved from a single, enormous crystal. "I used to think I did. After he died, I wondered if I had missed something essential about love, something that might have made the loss easier to bear or the loneliness less complete. But now, now I think perhaps I was saving that part of myself for something else, something I couldn't imagine at the time." Alaric stopped walking entirely, turning to face her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Evelyne, I know this is strange," she said quickly. "I know I should be terrified, demanding you send me home immediately. But I'm not. Being here feels like waking up from a long sleep." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, proof that even vampires carried the weight of their years. "May I show you something?" She nodded, and he led her into the crystal structure. Inside, the walls were lined with alcoves, containing objects that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. But it was the center of the room that captured her attention, a tall crystal that swirled with mist and shadow, images forming and dissolving like memories made visible. "This is my memory crystal," Alaric explained, his voice reverent. "It holds the most important moments of my existence, the experiences too precious to trust to the fallibility of recollection alone." As Evelyne watched, the crystal's surface cleared, to reveal images that made her breath catch. A woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, her face lit by candlelight as she tended to the sick in what looked like a medieval village. The woman moved with quiet confidence, her hands sure as she prepared remedies, her expression compassionate as she comforted the dying. "Her name was Isabel," Alaric said softly. "She was a healer, like you. I met her during a plague that ravaged the countryside 3 centuries ago." The images shifted, showing the woman and a younger version of Alaric working side by side, his supernatural strength helping her care for victims while her mortal wisdom guided their treatments. There was a tenderness between them that transcended the spoken word, a connection that seemed to bridge the gap between mortal and immortal as naturally as streams flowing together. "She loved you," Evelyne whispered, recognizing the truth in the woman's expression as she looked at him. "And I loved her, though I was fool enough to believe the differences between us were too great to overcome." Pain threaded through his voice. "When the plague ended, I left without telling her why. I thought I was protecting her from the danger of loving a monster." The images in the crystal grew darker, showing the woman's confusion and grief, her long wait for a return that never came. Then, inevitably, the progression of mortal time, illness, aging, death, all while Alaric wandered in self-imposed exile, believing he had done the right thing. By the time I understood my mistake, she was gone. he finished. I've spent 3 centuries wondering if love could truly bridge our differences, or if I was right to protect her from the reality of what I am. Evelyne felt tears on her cheeks, mourning for a woman she had never known, and a love story that had ended in needless tragedy. But there was something else stirring in her heart, a recognition that went deeper than sympathy. "When you look at me," she said quietly, "do you see her?" Alaric's silence was answer enough, but when he finally spoke, his words surprised her. "At first, yes. The resemblance is remarkable, though not exact. But the longer I'm with you, the more I see Evelyne Ashford, a woman who has lived her own life, made her own choices, earned her own wisdom. You're not her reincarnation or echo. You're yourself, entirely and completely. Then why does my pendant react to this place? Why do I feel like I've been walking toward this moment my entire life? Because perhaps you have been." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the cool energy that surrounded him. "Perhaps the universe occasionally grants second chances to those brave enough to take them." The crystal pulsed, and for a moment Evelyne saw her own reflection overlaid with images of Isabel. Not identical, but similar enough to suggest that some connections transcend individual lifetimes, that love might indeed be stronger than the boundaries between life and death. "What are you asking of me, Alaric? Nothing you're not ready to give," he replied. "But, if you're willing, I'd like to show you what our 2 worlds could accomplish together, what healing truly means when mortal wisdom combines with immortal knowledge." Her pendant grew warm against her throat, and Evelyne felt her heart opening to possibilities she had never dared imagine. Whatever came next, she knew her quiet life of solitary grief was ending. In its place, something far more complex and dangerous was beginning to bloom. "Show me," she said. The healing chamber, Alaric, led her to defy everything Evelyne thought she knew about medicine. Shelves carved from living crystal held vessels containing essences that shimmered with their own light, while pools of liquid starlight bubbled softly in recesses throughout the floor. The air thrummed with energy that made her fingertips tingle, and her healer's instincts sharpened to a degree she had never experienced. "These are the materials my people have gathered over millennia," Alaric explained, his voice filled with pride and sorrow. "Remedies that could cure any ailment, heal any wound, even extend mortal life, but without someone who understands both worlds, they remain largely useless." Evelyne moved through the chamber like a woman in a dream, drawn to a particular alcove where a stone the size of her palm pulsed with gentle blue-white light. The moment her fingers touched its surface, knowledge flooded her mind, not memories, but understanding, as if the stone were sharing centuries of accumulated wisdom directly into her consciousness. "The healing moonstone," Alaric said softly, watching her with fascination. "It hasn't responded to anyone since I've been here. Even touching it usually results in severe burns." "It feels warm," Evelyne murmured, lifting the stone carefully. "Like holding summer sunshine." As she spoke, the pendant at her throat began to glow in harmony with the moonstone, their combined light casting dancing patterns on the crystal walls. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving to one of the starlight pools. Images filled her mind of herbs from her garden, but transformed their healing properties, amplified beyond anything she had achieved through mortal means alone. She saw chamomile that could ease not just physical pain but emotional trauma, lavender that could heal the deepest spiritual wounds, heartsease that could literally mend broken hearts. "Show me how to begin," she said, turning to Alaric with eyes bright with possibility. For the next several hours, he guided her through the basics of immortal healing arts. She learned that the essences in the vessels were distilled from flowers that bloomed only under specific celestial alignments, their potency maintained through crystalline matrices that preserved their energy indefinitely. The starlight pools, he explained, were conduits to the cosmic forces that sustained life itself. "Your mortal herbs are already powerful," he told her, as she experimented with combining familiar plants with immortal essences. They grow in soil touched by countless cycles of life and death, drawing their strength from the accumulated experiences of generations. What we add here isn't power, but focus, the ability to direct that natural healing energy precisely where it's needed. Evelyne discovered that her hands, when holding the moonstone, could sense the flow of life energy in ways that made her previous healing abilities seem like fumbling in darkness. She could feel the places where pain lived in Alaric's immortal form, not physical pain, but the deep ache of 3 centuries of loneliness, the spiritual wounds left by loss and isolation. "May I try something?" she asked, moving closer to him. He nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his ancient eyes. "I should warn you, my kind don't heal the way mortals do. What wounds I carry are more complex than flesh and bone." "I understand." She placed one hand on his chest over his heart while holding the moonstone with the other. The pendant at her throat blazed with silver fire, and suddenly she could see the network of energy that comprised his immortal existence, beautiful and intricate as a spider's web touched by morning dew, but marked by dark places where old pain had crystallized into permanent scars. Gently, carefully, she began to work with the moonstone's power to soften those dark places. Not removing the pain entirely, she sensed that would be both impossible and wrong, as those experiences had shaped who he was, but easing the sharp edges, allowing the wounds to settle into something more like wisdom than torment. Alaric gasped, his eyes widening as he felt the healing touch reach places that had been frozen for centuries. "How is this possible? I've consulted every healer in the immortal realms, and none does, because none of them understood what it means to be mortal," Evelyne said softly, still working with the energy flows she could sense around his heart. "They couldn't heal the wounds left by loving someone whose life burns bright and brief as a candle. That kind of pain requires someone who understands how precious mortal love is, precisely because it doesn't last forever." When she finally stepped back, the moonstone's light had settled into a steady, gentle glow, and something fundamental had changed in Alaric's expression. The careful control was still there, but underneath it she could see a vitality that hadn't been present before, as if healing those old wounds had freed him to live more fully in the present moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had forgotten what it felt like to exist without that constant ache. And I had forgotten what it felt like to use my healing gifts for something truly transformative," Evelyne replied, marveling at the power still thrumming through her hands. "In the village, I could ease symptoms, provide comfort, but this feels like touching the source of life itself." They worked together through what passed for night in his realm, combining her knowledge of mortal herbs with his understanding of immortal essences. She learned to create tinctures that could heal not just physical ailments, but emotional wounds, balms that could ease the transition between life and death, remedies that could strengthen the connections between souls. More importantly, she learned about Alaric himself. He showed her his laboratory, where he had spent decades trying to recreate the healing partnership he'd shared with Isabel. His notes, written in a script that shifted between languages across the centuries, revealed a brilliant mind hampered by the absence of mortal perspective. "You've been trying to work with immortal logic alone," she observed, studying his formulations. "But healing is as much art as science, as much intuition as knowledge. You need both perspectives to create something truly powerful." "I know that now," he admitted. "But knowing and achieving are very different things. Until tonight, I wasn't certain it was possible to bridge that gap. And now," he moved closer, close enough that she could see the way her healing had softened the lines of old pain around his eyes. "Now I think we might accomplish something extraordinary together." The way he said "together" made her heart skip in a pattern she hadn't felt since her youth. This was different from what she'd shared with Thomas, deeper, more complex, touched with the kind of intensity that came from recognizing a kindred spirit across impossible circumstances. "The villagers will be searching for me," she said, though the thought seemed to come from a great distance. "Time moves strangely between our worlds," Alaric reminded her. "But yes, eventually we'll need to address that concern. The question is whether you want to return to them as the woman who disappeared, or as someone who has learned to bridge two worlds." Evelyne looked around the healing chamber, at the wonders she was only beginning to understand, then back at the man who was offering her a partnership beyond anything she had dared imagine. "I want to learn everything," she said. "But I also want to help them understand that the supernatural world isn't something to fear, but something that could make both our peoples stronger." Alaric smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the expression reached his eyes completely. "Then we have work to do." 3 days had passed in Alaric's realm, though Evelyne had learned that time flowed like honey here, thick and golden, making hours feel like moments and moments stretch into eternities. She had grown comfortable in the impossible palace, finding rhythms that suited her healing work and the gradual exploration of powers she was still learning to understand. It was while organizing the vast library of immortal texts that she discovered the tapestry. Hidden behind a collection of alchemical treatises, the fabric stretched from floor to ceiling, its threads seeming to shift and move when she wasn't looking directly at them. The images woven into its surface told a story that made her breath catch and her pendant flare with sudden, brilliant light. "Alaric," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. He appeared beside her with the fluid speed she was becoming accustomed to, then stopped short when he saw what she had found. His face went pale as winter moonlight, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. "The bloodline tapestry," he said, his voice hollow with wonder and something that might have been fear. "I thought it was lost centuries ago." The tapestry depicted 2 figures at its center, a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, and a pale man whose features were unmistakably Alaric's, though somehow softer, more human than his current appearance. Around them, threads of gold and silver spiraled outward, connecting to other figures across the centuries, showing the endless dance of souls through time and death and rebirth. But it was the bottom corner that made Evelyne's knees weak. There, in threads that seemed to pulse with their own life, was her own face, not as she appeared now, but younger, her features refined and idealized. Beside her image was a name that she somehow knew how to read, despite its archaic script: Isabelle de Montclair. "This isn't possible," she whispered, reaching out to touch the threads that formed her younger self's face. The moment her fingers made contact, the tapestry blazed with light, and visions flooded her mind. She saw herself, but not herself, standing in a plague-ravaged village, her hands gentle as she tended to the dying. She felt the love that had bloomed between that woman and the vampire who had tried so desperately to save her people. She experienced the confusion and heartbreak when he disappeared without explanation. The years of waiting, the gradual acceptance that he would never return. And then, impossibly, she felt the moment of that woman's death not as an ending, but as a pause between movements in a symphony that would continue across lifetimes. "You're her," Alaric said, his voice rough with centuries of suppressed grief. "You're actually her, returned to me." "No." The word came out sharper than Evelyne intended, but she couldn't let him diminish her into an echo of someone else. "I'm myself. I lived my life, loved my husband, made my choices. If Isabelle's soul lives in me somehow, it's as one thread in a tapestry, not the whole design." Alaric stepped closer, his ancient eyes searching her face. "But you feel it too, don't you? The recognition, the sense that we've stood together like this before." She couldn't deny it. From the moment she'd awakened in his realm, something deep within her had whispered that she was coming home rather than venturing into unknown territory. Her pendant had responded to his presence as if it remembered him, and her hands had known how to heal his immortal wounds with an intuition that transcended her mortal experience. "I feel it," she admitted. "But that doesn't make me a replacement for what you lost. I'm not her, Alaric. I'm Evelyne Ashford, widow of Thomas, keeper of herbs, woman of 52 years, who has lived a complete life of her own." "I know that," he said urgently. "I don't want you to be her. I want—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I want to know if what we had might be possible again, but with who you are now, not who you were then." The tapestry pulsed around them, its golden threads weaving new patterns that incorporated both their current forms. Evelyne watched, fascinated, as the ancient artifact updated itself to reflect the present moment, showing not the recreation of an old love, but the birth of something entirely new. "What does it mean?" she asked, studying the evolving patterns. "This tapestry, the way it changes, it's said to show the true connections between souls," Alaric replied, moving to stand beside her. "Not just romantic love, but all the bonds that matter, friendship, kinship, the ties that hold communities together. When the bloodlines were strong, it guided our people in understanding their true relationships. And now, it's showing us something that wasn't supposed to be possible." He pointed to where golden threads were spinning outward from their joined images, reaching toward representations of both the village and the immortal realm. "It's showing a true bridge between worlds, powered not by ancient magic but by choice, by two people deciding to build something together." Evelyne felt a rush of power flow through her pendant, and suddenly she could sense the threads the tapestry depicted. They were real, invisible connections that linked every living thing in an intricate web of relationship and responsibility. Her own threads reached back to Thomas, to the villagers she had healed, to the herbs she had tended, but they also stretched forward, weaving new patterns with Alaric and the possibilities their partnership might create. "The village," she said suddenly, as new images formed in the tapestry's lower section. "Something's wrong there." The threads that connected her to her old home were darkening, twisted with fear and anger. She could see Elder Godfrey, but he looked different, his face marked by an expression of cold ambition she had never noticed before. Around him, villagers she had known all her life were gathered with torches and weapons, their features distorted by hatred and terror. "They think you're dead," Alaric said grimly, reading the tapestry's message. "Or worse, they think you've been corrupted by dark forces. Then I need to return to them, show them I'm safe. It may be too late for that." He pointed to another section of the tapestry where darker threads were, gathering around Elder Godfrey's image. "Your village elder isn't what he seemed, Evelyne. The tapestry shows his true nature now that the barriers between worlds have weakened." She stared at the evolving images, seeing decades of careful deception revealed in golden thread. Godfrey hadn't summoned her to fulfill prophecy, he had summoned her to steal whatever power the prophecy might unlock. The sacred ceremony, her pendant's response, her transportation to Alaric's realm, all of it had been orchestrated to create an opportunity for him to claim immortal abilities for himself. "He's been practicing dark magic," she realized, watching the threads around his image pulse with sickly light. "That's why the prophecies called to me not to bridge our worlds, but to stop him from tearing them apart." Alaric's expression grew grim. "If he's gained access to the kind of power that could transport you here, he's more dangerous than any mortal should be able to become. And if he's convinced the villagers that supernatural forces are a threat to be destroyed, he'll use their fear to justify anything." Evelyne felt her heart clench with worry for the innocent people she had served for years. "We have to stop him." "We?" Alaric's eyebrows rose. "You could return to your life. Tell them you escaped whatever evil they imagined took you. You don't have to involve yourself in battles between our worlds." Evelyne looked at the tapestry, at the golden threads that showed what their partnership might accomplish, then back at the man who had become so much more than a stranger in just a few short days. "Yes, she said firmly. "This is my choice, Alaric. Not Isabel's echo, not the prophecy's demand, but my decision. I won't let him destroy either of our peoples." The tapestry blazed with approval, new threads spinning outward to show possibilities that neither of them had dared imagine, a future where mortal and immortal worked together, where healing transcended the boundaries between worlds, where love could indeed bridge any gap. But first, they had a corrupt elder to stop. The discovery of Godfrey's betrayal cast a shadow over the ethereal beauty of Alaric's realm, but it also crystallized something that had been building between them since their first meeting. As they prepared to face the threat to both their worlds, Evelyne found herself drawn deeper into the mysteries of immortal magic and into an understanding of just how dangerous their growing connection might prove to be. Alaric led her to a chamber she hadn't seen before, its walls carved from black obsidian that reflected their images in infinite regression. At the room's center stood a pedestal, holding a crystal vial no larger than her thumb, filled with liquid that seemed to contain trapped starlight. "The vampire's heart vial," he said, his voice heavy with reverence and fear. "It contains a single drop of my blood from before my transformation, the last remnant of my mortal humanity." Evelyne approached the pedestal carefully, feeling power radiating from the tiny vessel like heat from a forge. "What does it do?" "Legend says that if a mortal willingly mingles their essence with what's contained here, it creates a bond that transcends death itself. The two souls become permanently linked across all worlds and lifetimes." His pale eyes met hers. "But the cost if either person isn't truly ready, if there's any doubt or fear in their hearts, it destroys both souls completely. And you're telling me this because I can sense your magical abilities growing stronger with every hour you spend here. Soon, you'll need to make a choice about how far you're willing to go to bridge our worlds. The tapestry showed us the potential for perfect unity, but achieving it requires more courage than most souls possess." Evelyne studied the vial, noting how her pendant responded to its presence with a low, harmonic resonance. "Have you ever considered using it before?" "Once." Pain flickered across his features. "With Isabel. But I was a coward then, convinced that the differences between us were too great. I let her die, wondering why I abandoned her, when the truth was I was too afraid to risk everything for love. And now I'm 3 centuries older and hopefully wiser, but the choice isn't mine alone." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the cool energy that surrounded him. "I won't make decisions for you the way I did for her. If we take this path, it has to be because you want it, not because prophecy demands it or duty compels it." Before Evelyne could respond, the chamber's walls began to resonate with a deep, ominous tone. Alaric's expression shifted instantly to one of alertness, and she felt power gathering around him like a cloak. "What is it?" she asked. "Someone is trying to breach the barriers between our realms." He moved to a section of the obsidian wall that suddenly became transparent, showing a view of the mortal world that made Evelyne gasp. The village square was filled with people carrying torches and crude weapons, their faces twisted with fear and rage. At their head stood Elder Godfrey, but he looked nothing like the elderly scholar she had known. Power crackled around him in visible arcs of sickly green light, and his eyes held a cold ambition that chilled her blood. "He's trying to tear open a permanent gateway," Alaric said grimly. "If he succeeds, the barriers between our worlds will collapse completely. Chaos will follow immortal creatures flooding into the mortal realm, mortal terror and violence spilling into ours. Can he actually do that? Not alone. But he's using your disappearance to fuel the villagers' fear, channeling their terror and anger into raw magical force. combined with whatever dark arts he's mastered. Alaric's jaw tightened. Yes, I believe he can. Through the transparent wall, Evelyne watched her. Former neighbors brandishing weapons and shouting for vengeance against the supernatural forces they believed had stolen her. Mrs. Blackwood was there, tears streaming down her face as she called for the destruction of anything connected to the old magic. Young Margaret Thorne stood beside her new husband, both of them holding torches with shaking hands. "They're terrified," Evelyne whispered. "They think they're protecting each other from monsters." "Fear makes people capable of monstrous acts," Alaric replied. "Godfrey is counting on that. The more hatred he can generate, the more power he can draw from their collective emotion. Then we have to stop him before he succeeds." Alaric turned to face her fully. "Evelyne, what he's planning to do will require us to enter the mortal realm together. The moment the villagers see you with me, they'll assume their worst fears are confirmed. You'll be branded as corrupted, lost, possibly executed as a witch, and if we do nothing, both our worlds suffer." She moved closer to the wall, watching Godfrey's ritual grow more intense. "Besides, I think I understand now why the prophecy called specifically for me. It wasn't about my healing abilities or my magical heritage. Then what? It was about choice." She turned back to him, her decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "Isabel never got to choose her fate. You made that decision for her. But I can choose mine. I can choose to stand with you, to bridge our worlds, not because ancient magic demands it, but because I believe in what we could accomplish together." Alaric's expression shifted through a dozen emotions: hope, fear, love, terror. "You understand what you're risking? Not just your life, but your soul itself?" "I've been dead inside for 5 years, Alaric, living safely, quietly, never risking anything that mattered. When I touch that healing moonstone, when I work beside you in the laboratory, when I look at you and see forever in your eyes, that's the first time I've felt truly alive since Thomas died." She moved to the pedestal, her hand hovering over the crystal vial. "If we're going to face Godfrey together, if we're going to have any hope of stopping him, we need to be truly united. Not just allies, but something stronger. Evelyne." "Wait." Alaric caught her hand before she could grasp the vial. "This isn't a decision to make in haste. Once the bond is formed, there's no undoing it. We'll be connected across every lifetime, every incarnation, until the end of time itself. And that terrifies you? It terrifies me that you might come to regret it, that you might look at me someday and wish you had chosen differently." She lifted her free hand to touch his face, feeling the sharp beauty of his immortal features under her palm. "The only thing I regret is the years I wasted believing that safety was more important than connection. I choose this, Alaric. I choose you, and I choose the future we could build together." His resistance crumbled, and she saw in his ancient eyes the reflection of her own certainty. Together, they grasped the crystal vial, and the moment their combined touch activated its power, Evelyne felt her soul expand beyond the boundaries of her mortal form. The bond that formed between them was like nothing she could have imagined, not a loss of self, but a doubling of it, each of them remaining complete while becoming part of something infinitely greater. She could feel his thoughts, his emotions, his memories flowing into her awareness, while her own experiences and knowledge flowed into his. The pendant at her throat blazed with silver fire that matched the starlight in the vial, and together they became something that had never existed before, a perfect bridge between mortal and immortal, strong enough to heal the wounds Godfrey's ambition had torn between their worlds. But first, they had to survive what was coming. Through their shared awareness, they felt Godfrey's ritual reaching its crescendo, the barriers between worlds beginning to buckle under the pressure of his stolen power. "We need to go now," Alaric said, though she could hear his words both aloud and through their new mental connection. "Together, Evelyne replied, and for the first time in either of their long lives, neither of them faced the unknown alone. The journey between worlds was like being born again, a rush of sensation and light that deposited them in the village square just as Godfrey's ritual reached its crescendo. The familiar cobblestones beneath Evelyne's feet seemed strange now, viewed through her enhanced awareness, and she could feel Alaric's tension through their bond as dozens of terrified villagers turned to stare at them. The crowd's reaction was immediate and predictable. Screams pierced the night air, and several people dropped their torches in shock. Mrs. Blackwood fainted outright, while young Margaret Thorne clutched her husband's arm and pointed at them with shaking fingers. "There!" she cried. "She's returned, but look what's happened to her. She's brought the monster with her." But it was Elder Godfrey's reaction that sent ice through Evelyne's veins. Instead of surprise or relief at her return, his face twisted with fury that spoke of carefully laid plans suddenly disrupted. "Kill them both," he commanded, raising his staff, which she now saw was carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "She's been corrupted by dark forces. This creature has stolen her soul." "Wait!" Evelyne stepped forward, her voice carrying a power that made the crowd hesitate. "I've returned of my own free will. I'm not corrupted or stolen. I'm exactly who I've always been." "Lies!" Godfrey snarled, and power crackled around him like green lightning. "You disappeared during the sacred ceremony taken by evil. Now you return with one of the blood-drinking demons our ancestors fought to banish." Through their bond, Evelyne felt Alaric's careful restraint as he resisted the urge to respond to the villagers' terror with force. Instead, he remained still beside her, letting her take the lead in addressing her own people. "Look at me," she said to the crowd, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the square. "Do I look harmed? Do I appear to be under any enchantment? I am Evelyne Ashford, and I have learned things that could benefit us all if you'll listen." But Godfrey wouldn't allow her to continue. With a gesture that sent sickly green light crackling through the air, he commanded, "Seize them! She speaks with the demon's voice now." Several of the younger men started forward, but stopped when Evelyne's pendant blazed with silver light. The glow revealed something that made the entire crowd gasp, hidden behind the altar Godfrey had erected. For his ritual lay a scroll case that pulsed with the same malevolent energy that surrounded the elder. "What is that, Godfrey?" Evelyne asked, pointing to the case. "What are you hiding behind your altar? Nothing that concerns—" "Show them," Alaric spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Show them the betrayal scroll, and let them understand who the real monster is here." Godfrey's face went white, then flushed with rage. "You know nothing of our ways, demon. I know more than you think." Alaric moved with fluid grace to the altar, his superhuman speed allowing him to snatch the scroll case before anyone could react. "I know that this contains instructions for a ritual that has nothing to do with prophecy or protection, and everything to do with stealing immortal power for yourself." With careful reverence, Alaric opened the case and withdrew a parchment that seemed to writhe with its own malevolent life. The moment he began to read its contents aloud, Godfrey's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "Instructions for the harvesting of immortal essence," Alaric read, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "Step 1. Identify a mortal with latent magical abilities. Step 2. Use their connection to the supernatural realm as a conduit for dark magic. Step 3. Sacrifice the mortal at the moment of peak power transfer to claim immortal abilities permanently." The crowd's murmur of confusion turned to gasps of horror as the implications became clear. Evelyne felt sick as she realized how thoroughly she had been manipulated. "You never intended for me to fulfill any prophecy," she said, staring at the man she had trusted for years. "You planned to use me as a sacrifice to steal supernatural powers for yourself." The old ways are dying, Godfrey snarled, his mask finally slipping completely. Our village grows weak while other communities prosper. I've spent decades studying the forbidden arts, learning how to claim the power that could make us strong again. By murdering innocent people, Alaric said, his voice deadly quiet. By doing what's necessary. Godfrey raised his staff, and Evelyne could see the years of careful planning and corruption written in the twisted symbols carved along its length. One life to secure immortal power for our entire community, it would have been a worthy sacrifice. You mean one life to secure immortal power for yourself? Evelyne corrected, her anger building as she understood the full scope of his betrayal. You never cared about the village's welfare. You wanted to become immortal yourself. The betrayal scroll in Alaric's hands began to smoke and crackle, as if the truth of its exposure was destroying its dark power. But Godfrey wasn't finished. With a howl of rage, he began chanting in a language that predated the village itself, calling upon forces that made the air itself feel toxic. If I can't have your power willingly, he screamed, I'll tear it from your corpse. Dark energy erupted from his staff, lashing toward Evelyne like a living thing. But instead of striking her, it met the combined power of her bond with Alaric's silver light that turned the elder's attack aside like water flowing around stone. Impossible, Godfrey breathed, staring at the protective aura that surrounded them. No mortal should be able to resist the harvester's touch. I'm not just mortal anymore, Evelyne replied, feeling the truth of it resonate through every cell of her body. The bond she shared with Alaric had indeed transformed her, not into something less human, but into something more than human, a bridge between worlds that drew strength from both. Through their connection, she felt Alaric's memories of the last time dark magic had been used in this region. 3 centuries ago, a corrupt wizard had attempted something similar, trying to steal immortal essence to achieve eternal life. The devastation that followed had taken decades to heal, leaving scars on the land that could still be felt by those who knew how to look. You're repeating history, she told Godfrey, her voice filled with the authority of true knowledge. This same ritual was attempted before. Do you know what happened to the man who tried it? He failed because he was weak. Godfrey spat. I've spent my entire life preparing for this moment. I won't be denied. But even as he spoke, cracks were appearing in the dark aura around him. The betrayal scroll continued to burn in Alaric's hands, its destruction unraveling the careful web of corruption Godfrey had spent decades weaving. More importantly, the villagers were finally seeing him for what he truly was. He was going to kill Evelyne. Mrs. Blackwood whispered, her face pale with shock. He was going to murder her for power. All these years, Margaret Thorne added, her voice shaking, all these years he's been planning this. The way he always asked about magical bloodlines, about families with unusual gifts he was hunting for victims. The crowd's mood shifted from fear of the supernatural to horror at the very human evil they had trusted for so long. Several of the younger men started forward, not toward Evelyne and Alaric, but toward Godfrey himself. Stay back, the elder commanded, his staff crackling with renewed energy. I am your spiritual guide. I know what's best for this community. You're a monster, someone called from the crowd. A murderer who hid behind holy words. Godfrey's control snapped completely. With a wordless shriek of rage, he raised his staff and began channeling every scrap of dark power he had accumulated over the decades. The air around him turned sickly green, and the stones beneath his feet began to crack and blacken. If I cannot rule through wisdom, he snarled, then I will rule through fear. I will tear open the barriers between worlds and let chaos reign. Power erupted from his staff like a geyser of corruption, reaching toward the sky in a column of malevolent energy. Where it touched the air, reality itself began to warp and tear. Through the growing rifts, Glimpses of other realms flickered, not the beautiful twilight of Alaric's domain, but darker places filled with creatures that should never touch the mortal world. "He's lost control," Alaric said urgently through their bond. "The power he's channeling is beyond anything a mortal should be able to handle. It's going to tear him apart and take half the village with it." Evelyne felt the truth of that assessment through their shared awareness. Godfrey had indeed spent decades preparing for this moment, but his understanding of the forces he was manipulating was fatally flawed. He was like a child playing with wildfire, convinced he could control something infinitely more dangerous than he imagined. "We have to stop him," she said aloud, her voice carrying to the terrified villagers. "Everyone needs to get away from here now." But even as the crowd began to scatter, Evelyne knew it might be too late. The column of dark energy was growing stronger by the second, and through the rifts it was tearing in reality. She could see things beginning to move, ancient hungers awakening to the scent of mortal fear. The final confrontation had begun, and failure would mean the destruction of both worlds. The village square had become a battlefield between worlds, reality itself warping under the strain of Godfrey's uncontrolled power. Through the growing rifts in the air, dark shapes moved with predatory grace creatures that had been banished from the mortal realm centuries ago, drawn back by the scent of fear and chaos. "The barriers are collapsing," Alaric said urgently, his enhanced senses tracking the supernatural disturbances that Evelyne could only glimpse. "If those rifts stabilize, we'll have a full invasion on our hands." Evelyne felt the truth of his warning through their bond. Her newfound awareness let her sense the delicate balance that kept the worlds separate, a balance that Godfrey's ritual was destroying with each passing second. Already, she could see villagers stumbling as waves of otherworldly energy washed over them, their minds struggling to process sights that mortal perception was never meant to handle. "There has to be a way to stop this," she said, her healer's instincts rebelling against the idea of accepting defeat. "Some counter-ritual, or there is." Alaric's mental voice carried a weight that made her turn to stare at him. "But it would require us to enter the heart of his spell, to deliberately expose ourselves to more corrupted power than any being should be able to withstand." Through their bond, she felt him sharing knowledge that chilled her blood. The type of ritual Godfrey was attempting could indeed be stopped, but only from within, by someone willing to serve as a conduit for purifying energy, burning out the corruption at its source. The process would require them to channel forces that could easily destroy them both. "Show me," she said simply. With reluctance that she could feel like a physical weight, Alaric guided her awareness to a section of his vast library where the most dangerous knowledge was kept. Through their mental connection, she absorbed information about the Unity Chalice, an ancient artifact that could permanently bond mortal and immortal souls, but only if both parties were willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. "I brought it with us," he admitted, producing a goblet that seemed to be carved from crystallized starlight. "I hoped that we might need it." The chalice pulsed with gentle power that was the complete opposite of Godfrey's harsh corruption. Where his magic felt like acid eating through reality, the chalice radiated warmth and healing, promising unity rather than dominance. "What does it require?" Evelyne asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Complete surrender of individual will to collective purpose. We would cease to exist as separate beings and become something entirely new, a bridge between worlds that could heal any rift, stop any corruption." His pale eyes met hers with desperate honesty. "But there would be no going back. We would be transformed beyond recognition, bound together for all eternity." Around them, the chaos continued to build. More villagers fled as creatures began pushing through the widening rifts, shadow things with too many teeth, entities of pure hunger that had been waiting centuries for a chance to taste mortal fear again. "Missus." Blackwood screamed as something with eyes like burning coals reached a clawed appendage through a tear in the air near the bakery. How long do we have? Evelyne asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in the face of cosmic horror. Minutes, perhaps less. Alaric raised his hand, and silver light flowed from his fingers to drive back the creature threatening Mrs. Blackwood. Once those rifts reach critical mass, they'll become self-sustaining. The corruption will spread beyond our ability to contain it. Evelyne looked around the square at the people she had served for years, simple folk who had never asked for anything more than the chance to live quiet lives in peace. Margaret Thorne was helping her elderly grandmother toward safety, while William Fletcher stood protectively over a group of children whose parents had been caught in the initial panic. These were her people, and they deserved better than to become casualties in an immortal's quest for power. "Then we do it," she said, reaching for the unity chalice. "We perform the ritual." "Evelyne, wait!" Alaric caught her hand before she could grasp the artifact. "You need to understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't just about risking our lives. We're talking about fundamentally altering our very existence. We would become something that has never existed before, bound together in ways that transcend death itself. And that frightens you?" "It terrifies me," he admitted. "Not the binding itself, but the possibility that you might someday regret choosing to tie your fate to mine. I've already lost one love to my own cowardice. I don't think I could survive losing another to hasty decisions made in crisis." Through their bond, Evelyne felt the depth of his fear, not of death or pain, but of causing her to sacrifice more than she truly understood. She also felt his love for her, pure and fierce and entirely different from what he had shared with Isabel. This wasn't the echo of an old romance, but something new and vital that had grown from their shared work, their complementary natures, their choice to trust each other with their deepest vulnerabilities. "3 days ago, I was a widow living alone, convinced my story was nearly finished," she said softly, her hand still resting under his on the chalice. "Now I've discovered powers I never imagined, found a partnership that makes me feel more alive than I have in years, and learned that love can indeed transcend the boundaries between life and big death. If that's not transformation enough to prepare me for anything, I don't know what is. But this is permanent, Evelyne. There's no changing our minds afterward, no going back to who we were before." "Good." She spoke with a certainty that surprised them both. "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, with you, into whatever comes next. And right now, what comes next is saving both our worlds from a madman's ambition." Around them, reality continued to fracture. Godfrey's column of dark energy had grown to the size of a tower, and more creatures were pouring through the rifts with each passing moment. Several of the village buildings were beginning to warp and twist as otherworldly influence seeped into the mortal realm. "The ritual itself is relatively simple," Alaric said, accepting her decision with a mixture of relief and terror. "We each pour a portion of our essence into the chalice, then drink from it together. The artifact will handle the actual binding process." "What kind of essence?" "Blood, primarily, but also something more fundamental, a piece of our core identity, willingly given." He produced a small silver knife that gleamed with its own inner light. "The chalice will draw what it needs from us, but we have to offer it freely. Any hesitation, any reservation, and the ritual will fail catastrophically." Evelyne took the knife from him, testing its weight in her hand. It felt warm and somehow alive, as if it were eager to serve in healing rather than harming. "Together?" she asked. "Together." They each made small cuts on their palms, letting drops of blood fall into the chalice. The moment their combined essence touched the crystallized starlight, the goblet blazed with silver fire that was almost too bright to look at directly. More than blood was flowing into the vessel. Evelyne could feel pieces of herself being drawn forth, memories and experiences and dreams, all flowing together with Alaric's centuries of accumulated wisdom and power. The chalice sang with harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones, and the silver fire within it began to spiral upward, forming patterns that spoke of unity and transformation and the kind of love that could remake worlds. "Now we drink," Alaric said, his voice already beginning to change as the ritual's power built around them. "Now we become," Evelyne corrected, and together they lifted the chalice to their lips. The taste of the transformed essence was like liquid starlight, warm and electric and impossibly complex. As it flowed through her, Evelyne felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual identity. She was still herself, but she was also Alaric, and they were both becoming something entirely new, a being that existed simultaneously in both realms, equally at home with mortal compassion and immortal power. The transformation wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. Every sensation was amplified, every emotion deepened, every thought enriched by perspectives that spanned centuries of experience. She could feel Alaric's wonder as he experienced mortal perception enhanced by immortal awareness, just as she marveled at the vast tapestry of existence that immortal senses revealed. Around them, the air began to clear as their combined presence pushed back against Godfrey's corruption. The dark energy that had been tearing rifts in reality met something stronger, not force opposing force, but healing energy that sought to restore balance rather than impose dominance. "It's working," she said, though her voice now carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. "Yes," Alaric agreed, and his reply resonated in frequencies that spoke directly to her soul. "But the hardest part is still ahead. We have to enter the heart of his spell and heal it from within." Together, as one being with two forms, they turned toward the column of corruption that was Godfrey's ritual. The final confrontation was about to begin. The transformed essence of the unity chalice still sang in their veins as Evelyne and Alaric approached the heart of Godfrey's corruption. The elder stood at the center of his dark ritual. No longer fully human, the stolen power had warped his body into something grotesque, his skin stretched tight over bones that had grown too long, his eyes burning with green fire that hurt to look upon directly. "You're too late," he shrieked when he saw them coming. "The rifts are stable now. I can feel the power of eternity flowing through me." But even as he spoke, cracks were appearing in the column of dark energy that surrounded him. The unity chalice had indeed transformed Evelyne and Alaric into something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds that radiated healing rather than dominance. Where their combined presence touched Godfrey's corruption, the malevolent energy began to dissolve like shadow before dawn. "You understand nothing about the forces you're wielding," Alaric said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. "That power you think you've mastered, it's using you, consuming you from within. Lies." Godfrey raised his twisted staff, and creatures poured from the rifts around him, shadow beasts with eyes like burning coals, entities of pure hunger that had been waiting eons for a chance to taste mortal fear. "I am master here. I control the ancient powers." The creatures rushed toward them with inhuman speed, but something extraordinary happened. Instead of meeting the attack with force, Evelyne stepped forward and simply listened. Through her enhanced awareness, she could hear the pain beneath their hunger. These beings had been corrupted just as thoroughly as Godfrey himself, twisted into monsters by the same dark magic that was destroying the elder. "They're not evil," she realized, her voice filled with wonder and compassion. "They're victims, just like the villagers. The corruption has trapped them in forms that can only express suffering through violence." Drawing upon her healer's instincts, enhanced by immortal power, she reached out to the nearest creature, a thing of claws and shadow that should have torn her apart. Instead of attacking, it stopped, trembling, as her touch began to unravel the dark magic that had imprisoned it. The creature's form shifted, shadows falling away like shed skin, revealing something beautiful and luminous beneath a spirit of pure starlight that had been bound in nightmare for centuries. With a sound like celestial music, it soared upward and disappeared through one of the rifts, finally free to return to its home realm. "Impossible," Godfrey snarled, but his voice carried a note of fear now. "You cannot heal what I have corrupted." "Watch us," Alaric replied, moving to stand beside Evelyne as more creatures approached. Together, they began the work of healing on a scale that defied imagination. Each monster that reached them was revealed to be a victim, rather than a villain, their true forms restored and their spirits freed from the bonds of corruption. The very act of healing them was unraveling Godfrey's spell from within, proving that his understanding of the forces he wielded was fatally flawed. But the Elder wasn't finished. With a howl of rage that shattered windows throughout the village square, he began drawing power directly from the rifts themselves, no longer content with stolen essence, but attempting to tear open permanent gateways between all the worlds that existed. "If I cannot rule through wisdom, I will rule through chaos," he screamed, his staff blazing with energy that made reality itself scream in protest. "I will bring down the barriers completely and let the strong claim what they deserve." The air around them began to tear apart completely. Buildings flickered in and out of existence as multiple realities tried to occupy the same space. The very ground beneath their feet started to dissolve into probability clouds as the fundamental laws that kept the world separate began to collapse, and through it all, a new artifact began to manifest, drawn forth by the intensity of the conflict and the power being unleashed. Where Godfrey's staff had originally stood at the ritual's beginning, something was materializing from shattered fragments of reality itself. The shattered mirror of truth emerged piece by piece, its fractured surface reflecting not just physical appearances, but the deepest intentions of everyone present. As the mirror formed, its power began to reveal what lay beneath all the deception and corruption that had brought them to this moment. In its broken reflection, Godfrey's true nature was laid bare for all to see. He appeared not as a village elder or even as a power-mad sorcerer, but as something far more pathetic, a frightened old man who had spent his entire life feeling insignificant, nursing resentments against a world that had never recognized what he believed he deserved. The mirror showed his decades of careful manipulation, his slow corruption of sacred rituals, his willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for the promise of importance. But it also showed something else the moment years ago when he first discovered the forbidden texts and the choice he had made to pursue dark knowledge rather than accept his limitations. "No," Godfrey cried out as his reflection revealed truth after truth. "I am powerful. I am important. I matter." "You do matter," Evelyne said gently, her healer's compassion extending even to the man who had tried to murder her. "But not because of the power you've stolen. You matter because you're a living being capable of choice, and it's not too late to choose differently." The mirror's power intensified, and suddenly everyone in the square could see the truth it revealed. The villagers watched in horror and pity as they witnessed the corruption of someone they had trusted, but they also saw the path that had led him to this moment, the accumulated small resentments, the gradual abandonment of principle, the slow slide into darkness that could have happened to anyone who stopped choosing compassion over pride. But Godfrey's response to the revealed truth was pure rage. "I reject your pity," he screamed, raising his staff to strike at the mirror itself. "I reject your truth." The staff's dark energy lashed out toward the shattered mirror of truth, and in that moment, both Evelyne and Alaric realized what was about to happen. If the mirror was destroyed while actively revealing truth, the psychic backlash would tear apart the minds of everyone present, villagers and immortals alike. Without hesitation, they threw themselves between Godfrey's attack and the mirror, their transformed bodies serving as a shield against the corrupted power. The impact of Godfrey's corrupted power against their transformed bodies was like being struck by lightning made of malice and desperation. Evelyne felt the dark energy trying to tear apart the bond she shared with Alaric, seeking to divide them back into separate, vulnerable individuals. But the unity chalice had changed them too. Fundamentally, they were no longer two beings who could be separated, but one consciousness experiencing reality through multiple forms. As the corrupt energy washed over them, something extraordinary happened. The silver pendant at Evelyne's throat, the family heirloom that had started this entire journey, began to transform. The metal flowed like liquid starlight, reshaping itself into something that had never existed before. A phoenix feather pendant that blazed with the combined power of mortal wisdom and immortal strength. The pendant, Alaric breathed, his voice filled with wonder. It's becoming what you've become, a bridge between worlds, but permanent, unbreakable. The feather-shaped pendant pulsed with silver fire, and suddenly their defensive position became something far more powerful. Instead of merely blocking Godfrey's attack, they began to transform it, taking his corruption and pain and desperate hunger for significance and transmuting it into something healing and pure. "I won't let you!" Godfrey screamed, pouring more power into his assault. "I won't be denied. I won't be forgotten. You won't be forgotten," Evelyne said gently, her voice carrying across the chaos with perfect clarity. "But you'll be remembered for your choice. Do you want that memory to be of a man who chose love and redemption, or one who chose destruction and despair?" For a moment, just a moment, the elder's assault faltered. In the shattered mirror of truth, his reflection showed not just the monster he had become, but the man he could still choose to be. The mirror revealed possible futures, branching out from this moment, paths of continued darkness, leading only to more isolation and pain, but also a narrow thread of light, showing redemption, healing, acceptance of mortality, and the peace that could come with it. "I'm afraid," he whispered, his voice suddenly small and human again. "I'm so afraid of being nothing, of not mattering, of being forgotten when I die." "Everyone is afraid of that," Evelyne replied, her healer's compassion extending fully to this broken man despite everything he had done. "But the way to matter isn't to steal power, it's to use whatever time you have to help others, to leave the world a little better than you found it." The pendant blazed brighter, and through it, she began to share with Godfrey something he had never experienced, the true peace that came with accepting one's place in the larger tapestry of existence. Not the hollow satisfaction of dominance, but the deep joy of connection, of being part of something larger than oneself. For a heartbeat, she thought he might accept it. The dark energy around him flickered, and his twisted form began to soften back toward something recognizably human. But then his fear and pride reasserted themselves with crushing force. "No," he roared. "I will not accept insignificance. I will not fade quietly into oblivion." He threw everything he had into one final assault, not just the power he had stolen, but his very life force, burning himself out in a desperate attempt to tear apart the harmony that Evelyne and Alaric had created. The attack was so massive that it threatened to collapse the barriers between all worlds permanently, creating a chaos that would destroy mortal and immortal realms alike. But the Phoenix feather pendant was ready for this moment. As Godfrey's ultimate attack reached them, the pendant absorbed it completely, not destroying the energy, but transforming it at the most fundamental level. Pain became healing, corruption became purification, desperate hunger for significance became generous sharing of wisdom. The transformation was so complete and so powerful that it created a wave of healing energy that spread outward from their position like ripples in a cosmic pond. The rifts that had been torn between worlds didn't just close, they were replaced by something new. Connections that allowed beneficial exchange while maintaining the healthy boundaries that kept the realms distinct. Godfrey's scream of rage transformed into something else entirely, a cry of release as decades of accumulated pain and resentment were burned away by purifying fire. His corrupted form dissolved, but what emerged was not death but rebirth. The mirror of truth showed his spirit, cleansed and healed, finally accepting the peace he had rejected in life. "Thank you," he whispered as his spirit began to fade, heading toward whatever reward awaited those who found redemption at the last moment. "Thank you for not giving up on me." With his passing, the last of the dark energy dissipated. The village square was left empty except for the returned villagers, Evelyne and Alaric standing together in the center, and the gentle glow of the phoenix feather pendant that had completed their transformation. The shattered mirror of truth settled into wholeness again, its surface now reflecting not just what was, but what could be. In its depths, Evelyne saw the future spreading out before them, a world where mortal and immortal could work together, where healing could flow freely between realms, where love could indeed bridge any divide. They had won more than a victory over corruption. They had proven that redemption was always possible, that even the darkest hearts could be healed if someone was willing to extend compassion instead of judgment. The pendant pulsed once more, and Evelyne knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and the village of Millbrook had grown into something no one could have imagined. Where once there had been fear of the supernatural, now there was understanding. Where rigid traditions had once held sway, now there was room for growth and wonder. Evelyne stood in her transformed garden, which had become a living symbol of the harmony they had achieved. Her herb beds remained, but they now grew alongside plants from Alaric's realm, flowers that bloomed with inner light, healing herbs that thrived under multiple moons, magical specimens that enhanced her already formidable abilities as a healer. The most remarkable addition was the garden bridgestone that had appeared 3 days after Godfrey's defeat. None of them had created it. The stone had simply materialized in the center of her garden, a crystalline formation that served as a permanent, stable gateway between the mortal and immortal realms. Unlike the violent rifts that Godfrey had torn in reality, this bridge was gentle and selective, allowing passage only to those with peaceful intentions. "The morning visitors are arriving," Alaric said, emerging from their cottage with the quiet grace that still made her heart skip after all. These months together, the unity chalice had transformed them both, but the changes had settled into something beautiful rather than strange. They remained distinctly themselves while sharing a connection that transcended ordinary love. Through the bridgestone, a small group of travelers approached. Mrs. Blackwood walked beside a luminous being from the Twilight realm, both of them deep in conversation about bread-making techniques that incorporated starlight into the flour. Young Margaret Thorne laughed as she tried to keep pace with a sprite whose idea of walking included frequent bursts of flight, while her husband William carried notes about agricultural methods that could benefit both worlds. "It's working better than we dared hope," Evelyne mused, watching the easy interaction between mortal and immortal visitors. "Look how naturally they've adapted to each other." "Fear dissolves quickly when people realize they share common needs and dreams," Alaric replied, moving to stand beside her. "Immortals need purpose and connection just as much as mortals do. Your people need healing and wisdom just as much as mine do." The barriers were always artificial. The cottage they shared had grown too, not physically, but in purpose. What had once been her simple herbalist's home was now a healing center that served both realms. Mortals came seeking remedies for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't touch, while immortals arrived hoping to heal wounds that had festered for centuries. Together, Evelyne and Alaric had developed techniques that combined the best of both traditions. A young woman approached them, her mortal features marked by the telltale signs of someone whose magical abilities were just beginning to manifest. This had become increasingly common since the bridge was established. Bloodlines that had carried dormant supernatural heritage for generations were awakening, creating a new generation that naturally belonged to both worlds. "Healer Ashford," the woman said with shy respect. "My grandmother sent me. She says you might be able to help with these." She held out her hands, which glowed with soft silver light that she couldn't control. "Of course, dear," Evelyne replied, with the same gentle warmth she had always shown to those seeking healing. "This is quite natural. Your heritage is simply awakening to its full potential. We'll teach you to work with it rather than fear it." As they guided the young woman into the cottage for proper instruction, Evelyne reflected on how much her life had changed. At 52, she had thought her story was nearly complete, a quiet epilogue to a modest life. Instead, she had discovered that her real adventure was just beginning. The phoenix feather pendant at her throat pulsed gently, responding to her contentment. The artifact had become more than just a symbol of transformation. It was a living reminder that change was always possible, that love could indeed bridge any divide, that healing was a choice that had to be made again and again, every day. "Do you ever miss it?" Alaric asked during a quiet moment as they prepared remedies together. "The simplicity of your old life?" Evelyne considered the question as she ground herbs that sparkled with their own inner light. "I miss Thomas sometimes," she said honestly. "But I don't miss the loneliness or the sense that I was just marking time until my story ended. This," she gestured around their laboratory, "where mortal and immortal knowledge combined to create healing beyond anything either world had achieved alone. This feels like the life I was always meant to live. And us?" His voice carried a note of vulnerability that still surprised her. 3 centuries of existence hadn't made him immune to the occasional need for reassurance. "Us," she repeated, setting down her work to face him fully. "Alaric, in my first marriage I was content. Thomas and I were good companions, and we cared for each other deeply. But what we have, this partnership of souls, this shared purpose, this love that literally transcends the boundaries between life and death, this is what poets write about, and what I never thought I'd be brave enough to experience." He smiled, the expression transforming his austere features with warmth that could have lit the room. "When I lost Isabel, I thought love was something that happened to other people, something I had forfeited through my own cowardice. You taught me that love isn't just about finding someone, it's about choosing someone again and again through every challenge and change." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, their movements perfectly synchronized through the bond they shared. Outside, they could hear the sounds of both their worlds coming together, mortal laughter mixing with immortal song, children playing games that incorporated magic as naturally as breathing, the gentle hum of the garden bridgestone, facilitating connections that grew stronger with each passing day. As evening approached, or what passed for evening, in a realm where twilight was eternal, visitors began to head home through the bridgestone. Mrs. Blackwood pressed a loaf of starlight-infused bread into Evelyne's hands, with promises to return next week. Margaret and William waved goodbye to their sprite friend, who promptly disappeared in a shower of silver sparkles. "Another successful day," Evelyne observed, watching the last of the visitors disappear through the shimmering portal. "The first of many," Alaric agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "We have eternity to perfect this after all." She leaned back against him, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago she had been Evelyne Ashford, widow and herbalist, living quietly on the margins of village life. Now she was something entirely new, a bridge between worlds, a healer whose abilities transcended mortal limitations, a woman whose love story had literally rewritten the laws that governed reality itself. The phoenix feather pendant pulsed one more time, and in its light, Evelyne saw the truth that would guide them through whatever adventures lay ahead. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin not with youth and ambition, but with wisdom and the courage to believe that it's never too late for a new beginning. Their story was just getting started,